Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another show I was about to say another episode, but that's utterly wrong because this is the first in another brand new series on the show, kind of. I mean, it's familiar flavourings of what you've had on the show before, but in a sort of a different format that myself and my guest Drew are very, very excited about. Speaking of which, Drew, how you doing, mate?
Hey, buddy, how are you doing? Yeah.
I'm very good.
As good as we can be, I'm sure. So.
Of course, yes. No, I will ask you that in just a second. But just before we go into pleasantries, I want to give sort of the people watching a little bit of a background about what this is. Now, before I do, are you going to make a small promise that we may actually see you now and again?
Yes. No, 100%. So for today, I'm sure a lot of people can relate. My hair is a bit of a disaster zone because I haven't gotten a haircut in about 4.5 months.
Oh, yes, this is DIY job. This is.
So what I'll do is I'll make sure I endeavor to have time to fix this absolute mess before the next one. So.
Yeah, I mean, he wants to look good. I mean, can you blame the man? Can you blame him? But the idea around this show is, of course, a lot of you tune in for the Tactical Breakdown show, which is I say daily, weekly. It's with what's been going on at the moment. It's very difficult to keep up with things. Still working full time, hence why I can't put out daily content all the time. But what I wanted to sort of create was a guaranteed regular Tactical Breakdown show. Now, what I thought would be quite cool is because a lot happens during a week, and to give you a sort of a glimpse behind the curtain, what goes on behind making the Tactical Breakdown shows, effectively, as everyone is in Arsenal, we're on Twitter 100% of the time, scrolling through your timeline, looking through news, and when I see a link to someone that Arsenal's could possibly be looking at, I get straight onto as many experts as possible, trying to see if they're up for coming on the show and giving like a brief clip, as you see in the shows. And sometimes that takes a couple of days. But what's good about this is that myself and Drew want to provide you with a weekly breakdown of transfer activity at the moment, because that is what is hot right now. But not only that, is that as this show develops and matures, also when we drop into the parts of the season where transfers aren't so hot, we can start to look into the tactics of not only transfers, but the games as well, and how Arsenal may have been adapting, how certain players might be adapting once they've joined, or even players that have been at the club for a long time, how they might be adapting under the new managerial ownership of the club. So that's sort of the route where we want to go down. Drew, is there anything that you want to sort of add on to what I've missed?
Not too much. I just kind of feel like, for me, as we spoke before, there's kind of a mini void regarding podcasts that really deep dive into Arsenal tactics, particularly. I think a lot of podcasts do a really good job about bringing them up when they do in a little bits and bobs, but just not really, for me, one that really kind of just hones in and really does a focus on it. So I feel like that could be a little niche we could play in, I think. Because of how successful the mini videos you've done have been, there's no reason to really push forward with it and give it its own special thing. So.
Exactly. And obviously it won't just be me and Drew on each week. The main plan is that we will have a guest. Of course, that is the main thing that people like about some of the Tactical Breakdowns, is the expert guest that we have on. And we will, fingers crossed, be joined every single week by a different expert, especially focusing around a specific player or regional country that has been linked to Arsenal that week. So next weekend, hopefully, we'll be seeing our first guest come on. And also, if you watch right from the beginning, you would have seen an intro. Now, fingers crossed, if a friend of mine pulls through, we will see a brand new intro for this show as well, which I know a lot of people don't care about that sort of thing, but genuinely it's probably going to be the highlight of my lockdown, seeing this new intro come into the channel, which is the saddest thing ever. But I'm looking forward to it, and I can't wait to have that at the start of the show as well. So thank you ever so much, everyone that's tuning in right now. We are going to do a podcast, believe it or not. It's not just telling you what the show's about. And we sort of thought, because the players that have been linked to Arsenal right now have been typically midfielders, which is a strange thing, especially when you consider how much the defence gets focused on, but not so much of a surprise, because we know that Arsenal have a track record of specifically purchasing players in positions where they typically don't need them. But this midfield may be a certain case where actually we do need some reinforcements. So we're going to talk about the midfield, specifically the players that are at the club at the moment, and then look into some of the transfer targets. So Drew, let's start off talking about this. First of all, if you look at the Arsenal midfield right now and you look at our competitors, we arguably have the weakest maybe is too harsh, but easily one of the weakest midfields of the lot.
We do. I feel like they've been focused this summer about, the Upamecano news or the not news and everything surrounding that. But I think moving forward, if you look at his time at City, if you look at kind of almost the evolution of their midfield, you can kind of maybe see what Arteta might be looking to instill with us moving forward. Now that he's better than presumably the players are now used to him, he's going to want to know what he's going to want to do long term. And if you look at it, I don't know if we have enough about us in the center of the park to really sort of give us that anchor you need to really push on. And I think anyone would agree that we struggle immensely in midfield certain times. Certainly we did under Emery and in large spells. Arteta, things have shored up a little bit. That work rate was improved upon. I think that sort of helped bridge the gap slightly, but it's not going to be enough to really push us forward. I think it was enough to really stabilize the ship, if you will. I think just the balance is off. We don't know what's going to happen with Ceballos, if he's going to come in on a full, if he's going to go back. People are questioning if Guendouzi, maybe he's been overutilized too much, or if he's been consistent enough. People aren't sure if Wilkes end up as an 8 or a 10 or a hybrid. So there are a lot of questions. So it's not really a surprise that we might be potentially looking at some reinforcement in the summer if we can even afford it at the moment. But I do think it's, traditionally when you look back, any team that wins the Premier League or really any big trophy in Europe, they normally have one of the top midfield, cores in that league. Certainly,
Of course, yeah.
So I think that's something we have to focus on, and it's something we struggled with over the last, maybe a decade. You could even go back as far as saying that. So, it definitely needs a bit of attention.
And when you just look at, you mentioned there the midfields of the other sides, and when you look at the quality there, Manchester City arguably have the best number 10 in the world, some people would say. And also you look at the importance of a midfield when they struggle when Rodri was out for a long time, and when Fernandinho maybe was having to deputise in the centre-back area as well, and they lost him in that midfield, how vulnerable they looked. It's such a key area of the pitch. Manchester United have brought Bruno Fernandes in, and the transformation of their attacking threat with him in the side has been massive. And then you look at us, and we just seemingly lack a lot of consistency. Now, on the Ozil sort of side of things, if we sort of look at the number 10 area of the midfield to start off with, Arteta has put faith in Ozil, which a lot of people would have surprised about. I think they would have expected him to be maybe a little bit more ruthless with some of the players, but he has put a lot of faith in the German. And that midfield slot of the number 10 player, even though people have seemingly said it's a dying role, seems that it's set to stay. Is that the correct choice in an Arsenal midfield?
I think for now it has to be. I think, at least obviously, I'm not in his brain, so I can only give you my thoughts on it. But I think he's looked at the squad and said, this is what's the best possible 11 I can put out, utilizing the best option I have available. And if you look at it, really, Mesut Ozil is one of those players. And I know he's maybe put up just two sides of the track with him. People either love him or they don't. There's not really a middle ground, I kind of feel at this point with the fan base. But you can't really deny his intellect as a footballer, his technical ability, his ability to control the flow of play, and he is in fact creative. And people will look at his assist numbers and say that he's only gotten X number of assists in his last 50 appearances, and it's a low number. But that does not mean that he doesn't make us tick and move forward. And I think overall, that's kind of what you're looking for. At least maybe that's what Arteta's looking for at the moment, because we do have a very large lack of quality creatively in this side currently. So I think part of it is going to be that he wants season, but I think he might almost feel like he almost has to because of that fact. We don't really have a ton of creative players. Even our wingers aren't really hyper creative. You've got Aubameyang playing on the left wing a lot of the time. He's not creative at all, if you want to be completely honest about it. Pepe has some about him, but after that, Nelson's a very direct winger. I wouldn't call him a creative winger. Saka can provide a good ball from deep, but can he really make a side tick? It's a little bit of a difference. And then we look at how Ceballos has struggled and not really settled, and you kind of assume that would have been the player to really pick up that mantle if Mesut Ozil wasn't going to be at the club anymore, or if he just doesn't get on with the new manager. But you don't really see a real breadth of it like you do in other sides. And I think that's going to be the reason why I think maybe he's tried to highlight him early doors. We don't know what's going to happen moving forward, but we do know that Ozil's going to be here for the duration of his contract. Whether if he signs on after that's another story, but while he's here, you should tap into him. And I think maybe that's where Arteta's coming from.
Yeah, I just a lot of people will turn around and say that his time is done and Arsenal should be looking to move on. And I mean, I flip flop around the Ozil debate so much because 1 minute, and to be fair, it's not my fault. It's completely Ozil's.
No.
One minute he's good, the next minute he's just not. And consistency has always been the Germans' biggest problem for me. And I know what he's capable of, and everyone should be aware of what this guy's capable of because the season that he joined and we went on the run and then obviously won the first FA Cup ending that trophy drought, it's clear and obvious to see what a number 10 position can do, especially when you've got such a pacey front line with Pepe and Aubameyang and Lacazette or Martinelli or Saka or Nelson. There's so much pace in that front line that a number 10 should have a field day. The problem is that Arsenal have been playing previously under Emery in such a passive style that we would build up and build up and build up and not really create anything and not utilize maybe the pace that we had available to us up top as well. And also the problems, and we'll come on to strikers in another show, but the problems that sort of dynamic created where we didn't know who was going to be at number 9, were we going to force Aubameyang out to the left? I don't think that's helped with the number 10 role either. The other side of things is then the pivot. When, I mean, you just look about Ozil and the arguments that fans have, arguably you've got an even more divisive character in Granit Xhaka there. Probably not before this season, as divisive as maybe Ozil has been, but after obviously the massive issues that we've had behaviourally with him, a lot of people called for his head, including myself. I'm amazed that he's still playing for the club, but I'd get behind any player that plays in the red and white shirt. But tactically, we still lack, for me, that out-and-out key defensive midfielder, and have done ever since Gilberto Silva left. I mean, arguably Coquelin fulfilled that role in a lesser quality extent, and it wasn't enough to sort of push us on. I mean, if you think how much we wasted, the time we wasted, that we could have put someone amazing next to Santi Cazorla, and we didn't. How key is it for Arteta to get that midfield pivot sorted? And are you seeing that with the transfer targets that we're being linked to?
I mean, I think it's absolutely key. And then if you look at City, that's one of the things that they really tried to not only get a primary player for, but a rotational option who could also come in and easily be a starter in his own right. And then same thing with Liverpool. You look at that role. You look at other big clubs around Europe. It's vital for them. You know, especially if you're going to want to play attacking football and utilize wing backs where you can really leave your center backs exposed, and even your more creative center midfielder, you need someone who can just bring that support. You know, and again, I would agree with you. We really haven't replaced that role since Gilberto Silva. I don't think anyone can really deny that. And if you look at how Torreira has done at the club, you would say that he's done a decent job. He came in, he was brilliant in the first half of his first season. He struggled the second half. And it remains to be seen really how he'll truly get on moving forward under Arteta. But the fact that does remain is that he's the only player at the club who can really actually play in that role. And then some think that he might be more of a box-to-box midfielder instead of a deep defensive midfielder. So it's a tricky one. But I think it's an area where it's absolutely crucial that we get some semblance of just that rock again. And I don't mean it in terms of, you know, like a heyday 30 years ago, just more of we need that type of player who gives us that stability in midfield where we can stop seeing our center backs ruthlessly exposed time and time again, even Xhaka as well. And I've said this since before he came to this club, that when he's allowed to do his work with a protector, he is very, very good. When he's too easily exposed when he doesn't have that shield, like most center midfielders can be of his type of player. So I think it's just something we just really have to focus on. And if we can't do it through the market, then we have to do it through adapting a player that we already have to fit that role. Some might say Callum Chambers could maybe deputize in that role when he's back fit. You never really know. Maybe Torreira will come on and do a better job. But if we're going to spend any money in the market this summer, I think that's the role we really have to look at for me. But again, that's just how I view it. So
let's link those two areas of the pitch together there. Mr. J, one of our members in the chat, has said, until Arteta, we never had a good enough defensive structure to allow Ozil to flourish. Wenger's last 2 years weren't good, and 18 months under Emery we didn't move forward. And how important is that midfield pivot in allowing your number 10 to be more free and not have to think, my God, if I lose the ball, what's going to happen behind me?
I mean, again, it's vital, but then also you just need players that are going to get him the ball. And depending on how you transition from back to front, how you want to build your play, you shouldn't have your. How many times did we see Ozil dropping back behind the center midfielders to get the ball from the center backs? That's something you don't want to see. It means that there's not enough faith in the players behind them to get the job done in that area.
Does that bleed into a centre back issue? Because
I think it bleeds.
Mertesacker link the midfield all the time.
I think it bleeds to both. But I think when you don't have that center midfield option that the center back can look at, they'll dawdle on the ball and not make a quicker decision. I think it's a bit of both, and I think they're connected, as you say. And I think that's part of the reason why we didn't transition as well as we could have. How many times did we have a chance to really break quickly, and the opportunity was passed up? I think that has a lot to do with it. At least for me, just the way I kind of see it. So, it's just, without saying too much again, it's so crucial. The spine of your team is so crucial, and that's been our biggest problem area for years. Even going back to the last couple of years under Arsene Wenger, for sure, 100%. So it just needs to be fixed. The sooner the better. And I think as a midfielder, as a player, and the type of player he was, Arteta will see that hopefully. And you have to think that he's got something ticking in his head that of a way to really rectify the problem. That's got to be the hope. So.
Oliver Forway in the chat actually brought up a really interesting point about the fact that Torreira is really our only good defensive player in midfield, but he lacks certain physical attributes that someone like Kante has, other than when he slips over for Chelsea. But when if you look at Torreira, for me, when he came in, there's something about lazy commentary in games, is that Torreira came in and finally all the pundits and all the commentators said, this is the guy that Arsenal have been missing to complete that midfield. They've been crying out for a defensive-minded midfielder. But I think that there was irony about the fact that when he came in, he was already boosted to stardom by the fact that we had no one else as sort of a control to measure the impact of how much we would improve with him, because we haven't had a defensive-minded midfielder, really, other than you could argue Granit Xhaka was playing that role, but it wasn't, for me, to an effective extent that allowed him to do what he does best. And that meant that when Torreira came in, it looked as if we were getting a player that was significantly going to improve us. And whilst I do think he did improve us, I don't think Torreira is as good as we originally may have thought he is. And I think Oliver brought that point up. And I think that is why we're starting to see some links to some more physical midfielders like Thomas Partey, like Gerson, even Rabiot. I know isn't a defensive midfielder, but he's certainly more physical than what Torreira is. Do you think there's definitely some substance in that?
No, I do agree. I think Oliver has a habit of bringing up very good points. So Oliver, we appreciate that. No, it's true. If you look at, and we've already kind of name dropped it. If you look at Rodri, as an example, that's kind of, if you measure him, you look at Partey and say Partey and Rodri are similar players. If you look at Torreira and Rodri, you'd say they're very, very different. And the physical aspect is that difference, and it's huge. And I think that's the reason why sometimes we struggle against teams who won't bring the same technical quality or tactical nuance to a match, but they'll bring that physical component of the game that is very present. And I think sometimes they'll struggle in those. You don't want your primary defensive midfielder to be easily pushed off the ball, and he is a pit bull. He will work hard for you. He will get stuck in. He himself can just be dominated a little too much in the Premier League, and I think that's the difference. I think, and then you also look at the tactical component of it. People will say like how well he played that defensive midfielder for Uruguay or for Sampdoria, and that's correct. But they're using different systems that utilize his strengths a little bit differently, and it masks his physical deficiencies differently as well. When he's in a midfield three and he's the deepest of the three and he's linking directly the center mids with the center backs, that's a different role than him playing alongside someone in just a midfield two. It's very, very different. So I think that's kind of, you look at what he could bring, and I agree with you. I think he did improve just a little bit, but it's not to the level that it needs to be for us to hit the high step a club of the stature really should be focusing on. And I think that's kind of the difference for me.
Daniel says that he felt that maybe Torreira was lessened under Emery. I mean, I think that's a given. I mean, the amount of times we saw Torreira in the opposition's box when we were playing, and I got the tactical side of it. I got the reasoning why he was doing it, thinking that if you can win the ball higher up the pitch, you're a much greater threat when you've won that ball back, because you don't have to do with the build-up or the runs to get into the opposition's final third. But the problem is that just simply Torreira wasn't able to do that job. Torreira can only man part of the pitch, and it's a very easy. While we were pressing, we weren't pressing effectively, and whilst Torreira can run for days, and we know that he can, you can pass through that press quite simply when it's just Torreira that's putting in the work. The forward line wasn't pressing enough. You're not going to get it from Ozil at number 10. So it's great as an idea and as a theory to think, well, if we can press our defensive minded midfielder further up the pitch to win the ball back, that's great, yeah. And Barcelona did it fantastically under Pep Guardiola in the amount of pressing that they did back in the early 2010s. But when you look at what we try to do and how teams were just so easily passing through us. I mean, one of the big reasons why we lost the Europa League final, besides the fact that Chelsea completely isolated our front two, was that they were just able to pass through our press so simply. And I'm praying and hoping that under Arteta, that doesn't happen. And that actually bleeds nicely into what Joe has said, where he says, do you think Arteta will go for a 3-centre midfield like Liverpool have, with a less creative number 10 force? Or do you think we'll stick with a Man City-esque, and you could argue what we've seen over the last decade and longer?
You almost kind of want to think that because you would maybe classify Arteta as more of a modern manager, he'd want to be able to do both. Because if you look at Liverpool under Klopp, they do both. There will be times where they rejig the 11 and they have more creativity in the center of the park, but sometimes they'll rein it back a little bit and they'll go for more graft and more hard work and more pressing in midfield instead of that creativity. It just depends on the nature of the day, what's needed.
Like at Liverpool, you look and it's either Wijnaldum or Oxlade-Chamberlain that sort of becomes that number 10 effectively when they're on the push. So
right, exactly, and I think. And we have the players for that. That's the thing. We have most of our midfielders we can reliably put into 8-10 hybrids in front of a holding midfield player if we wanted to. Or the thing is, we can't really do 3 center mids that are very adept at pressing and understanding kind of the lanes of the pitch. I think that's where we might struggle. But I think moving forward, we kind of want the ability to be flexible, and that's another big issue for us if we've not been as flexible as we needed to be, like City and Liverpool can be. Even, and I hate to say, even Spurs often had more flexibility than we did in the center of the park, especially when they had Dembele at the club as well. He let them do so much because he covered so many aspects of what the center midfielder needs to do. They could really just build their nucleus around him, and it really helped. So I think that's where we needed to focus. I think ideally he'd maybe want to look a little bit more like City, but have that Liverpool ability to really shift things as well. I think that might be where his head's at.
Interesting question from Gooner Tash, who says, aren't all systems theories somewhat? As fans, we easily gravitate towards the system that wins the most.
I mean, yeah, I would say so. I like the good questions on day one. Good questions.
Oh, no. I was thinking we've got them.
Good
day one. Brilliant.
No, yes, all systems are theories, because all systems, when you look at it on paper isn't what transpires, right? So you could say, if you're looking at the tactics board, I'm going to go with a flat 4 midfield. That doesn't mean that they're just always going to be in a flat 4. How you operate with the ball and without the ball is where the theory becomes what the practice is. So again, that but also depends on the pieces you put into the puzzle. And if you're limited in what you're able to do, that theory becomes, you can't really expound on it. It's more of, I'm forced to do this one thing with this one quote, call it a theory, for example. And as Danny just said in the chat, that we need players that can be flexible, and we haven't really had that. It's that for me probably is our biggest midfield weakness. Past the fact that we don't really have that kind of Thomas Partey player or Rodri player, we don't have the flexibility required to really take on all the challenges you're going to get in the Premier League, and then subsequently, hopefully, in Europa League or Champions League. And again, the top sides will have those different options. Another example, you look at Bayern, how many midfield combinations they can come up with depending on what they need on that day. Even Borussia Dortmund as well, same thing. That's where we're going to struggle. That's where we have struggled, and it's really the thing that separates those ahead of us from where we need to be.
Yeah, it comes down to quality for me so much. Like you can look at what Liverpool, Man City are doing, and I think that yes, Taj, you hit the nail on the head in talking about like fans do sort of lean towards the system that's working the most. It was total football and then tiki-taka. And I think especially when Arsenal was sort of paraded as this mirror of Barcelona with their quick passing style, that when things went to change and Arsene Wenger left, a huge thing was for the fan base to see us still continue to play nice football, which puts a lot of people off the likes of Diego Simeone, possibly been a manager that could have taken over. And when the thing is now is when you look at how football changes and develops and evolves over the decades, that Arsenal, for me, now do need to shift into a more, whilst, yes, sticking with strong passing ability, but certainly a more competitive team, a more industrial side that we saw linked with the quick and the finesse of, say, an invincible side that was scary in the tunnel. And I think the player that I'm going to come on to now epitomizes that sort of strength of character and industry, and also ability to transition and work on the opposite side of the pitch going forwards. And Thomas Partey has been linked to Arsenal for now what seems to be a long time. And if you were to read, say, the Twitter accounts of the ITKs, that whilst I loathe half the time, I can't help but follow and read their tweets and think that, well, all of a sudden it seems that we are going to be signing Thomas Partey. But let's just imagine for a second that Thomas Partey is a clear, well, I think it's very obvious that he is a clear Arsenal target this summer. Let's imagine that he's someone that's gettable for us and that it can happen. What will he bring that Arsenal don't currently have, do you think?
I think part of his game that I appreciate quite a bit is the fact that he's so composed on the ball and in possession for a player who, if you look at him, he can really drive a team. He's tough in a tackle. He's a good physical midfielder, but he's still very calm and composed and collected, and he has a little bit of creativity about it as well from deeper areas. I think he presses quite well. I think that's incredibly important. But again, is that just him? Is that part of what he's been tasked to do? These are all questions you can kind of ask yourself. But I think he has all the actual, at least for base level components you want in a midfielder. He's also, and also I don't think people are really discussing enough. They keep talking about him as a player in terms of what he can bring on the pitch. But I think the biggest thing you can want to ask yourself is that he brings, for someone who's 26, he has a wealth of age and a wealth of experience, rather, for someone who's not even in his prime playing years yet. He understands how to flip that switch from defend deep to press to push forward. He has a lot of intelligence about him. I think that's something that we really lack. And again, he offers that type of versatile midfielder, not in terms of the positions he's going to play, but more of what he can bring you when you need it. And that's not something I don't think we have at all of any of our midfielders. So I think it's always been for us, it's how you can play Xhaka so he is at his best, which one role. And then with Villa and Ceballos and Torreira, same thing. It's always what one role, what one or two tasks can they do that'll highlight the most. I think Partey isn't that kind of player. I think Partey he'll do a very good job no matter what you ask him to do. And that goes back to what we were saying before about that versatility and that having that kind of option, and other clubs around us who have players of that ilk that we really don't have. So I think for me, that's probably the biggest thing is, if you're going to see him on the pitch, no matter what you ask him to do, he'll do it and he'll do it well. That's a big thing.
Yeah, I think that what's very key is if we do go for Partey, for me, we have to move away from having an out-and-out number 10 to make it work, because I don't think Partey comes in and plays next to, say, Torreira, next to, say, Granit Xhaka, and I don't think you get the best from him from playing him in that pivot. I think that would restrict him too much, and because he does now, as he's sort of evolved and become, as Stu said, they're more progressive in that Atletico side, that we would become still vulnerable, even with Partey in that midfield. And I think that means that you have to go and transition to sort of play a midfield that we're seeing Liverpool perform to get the best from him. And I also think that a lot of pressure on that will come from the likes of Pepe becoming a more creative force on the right-hand side, and, say, seeing Saka not play at left-back and will really sort of benefit from a fully fit Kieran Tierney, and possibly seeing Saka, who was arguably our most creative player this season, move into a further forward-thinking role on that left-hand side. Fingers crossed we can tie him down to a new deal. And then playing with a midfield that is more competitive and combative means that you can actually get more from your front three, and then allow the fullbacks to really, really do what they can do best, which is ultimately attack. So for me, and the final sort of thing to focus on is Partey coming in for you a big, if it is, we're saying it like it's happening, but if Partey was to come in, is that the biggest sign for you that we could be seeing the number 10 fade away from this Arsenal side?
I would think long term for sure, and that I don't think we'll see it after Mesut Ozil is done with the club, and whichever manner that's going to be. I think if you look at some other players that we have, you think about Emile Smith-Rowe, for example. I don't think we'll see Emile Smith-Rowe as a number 10 or as a second striker. I think you'll see him you can almost kind of see him in kind of that Aaron Ramsey role, because he's very good on the ball. He can drive play forward, but he works quite hard. He's physically more stout than what people might imagine. He's not done growing yet. Maybe you'll see him in that role. I don't think you're going to see like the prototypical 4-2-3-1 with an out-and-out number 10. If you do see a player in that number 10 hole, they're not going to be a traditional number 10. You're going to see it more of like how a Kevin De Bruyne evolved for a decent example. So, or you might not see it at all. None of us are going to know yet, but I don't think we'll have an out-and-out 10. And I'm okay with that. I think, as we've all said, football evolves, and that flexibility is needed. And usually out-and-out number 10s aren't really tactically flexible normally. And I think that you've already seen under Arteta that flexibility is going to be important. Even if it didn't really come off on that day, if that player didn't really suit that role, he's still trying to hammer in the fact that flexibility is important. I think that's what maybe you'll see more of, that, not just one player locked into just one specific role. It's going to be players doing multiple roles in a certain area of the pitch, and they'll evolve based off the need. I think that's all you really need to do.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a good place to sort of finish things for today's show. What I'd say is that for the first show, and you brought it up earlier, the chat box has been bloody fantastic. It's fair to say. You guys have absolutely smashed it with some of your questions and the comments. And I know it's probably irritating for some of you that have spent time typing out some of these that we haven't got to. But typically these shows will be slightly longer as well with a guest, and I'm aiming to put in a question section at the end. But I hope you've enjoyed the interactive side of this, where we put in some of your comments throughout. I'm praying that this is the worst podcast that we do, and that all of the ones coming after this are going to be miles better, of course, with the addition of a weekly guest, a fantastic intro, which, Drew, I'm not going to let this go. I'm genuinely so excited about a new intro.
I'm going to be hearing about this all week. I can't wait.
It is. I'm going to post it on air and everything hopefully, if it comes through. But also, what I will say is at the end of every show, and I'm praising you guys, is that we need you massively. Obviously, I'll be putting a tweet out on the Twitter account, which you can find us at the Gooner Talk TV on Twitter. If you've got Twitter, if you haven't, download it purely for this reason. Go on there and drop a retweet on that and share it around and tell people about this, because we feel that this is something that isn't done by loads of people, specifically targeting on tactics, looking at things that maybe other people aren't right now. And to do that, we need your help to spread the word as much as possible. So thank you ever so much for praise. Of course, you can help us if you haven't got Twitter, just simply by dropping a like on the video. That's really appreciative of that, so we know that you're enjoying it, and subscribing to the channel. You can find us, as I've already mentioned, at the Gooner Talk TV. You can find Drew at FM Lera.
What is that?
I'm sorry, I'm not German. So please do go check out Drew's account over on Twitter, and you can check us out, as I've already mentioned too. Really look forward to seeing you guys next week for the proper full-blooded version of this. But I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you again very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.